Machiavelli never wrote a manual on love, but he didn't need to. His philosophy, sharp and unapologetically human, reveals something most people today still refuse to confront. Power shapes desire, not just in politics, in relationships, especially when it comes to the kind of love some women seek. There's a brutal law that runs underneath Machiavelli's teachings, one that's often misunderstood or deliberately ignored. People do not love you for your goodness, your kindness, or your potential. They love you for your utility. And the moment you lose that, or worse, outgrow their control, that love often turns to resentment. This isn't bitterness. This is strategy. Because just as rulers fear citizens they can't manipulate, some women, certain women, fear men they cannot shape. Not through logic, not through seduction, but through emotional leverage. They don't want a strong man. They want a manageable one. And when strength shows up, they either attempt to tame it or slowly destroy it. So what happens to the man who submits? Who chooses peace over presence, affection over authority, harmony over honor? He gets affection, yes, but not admiration. And without admiration, love becomes a performance. A quiet war where the one who holds the strings sets the terms. Machiavelli understood this well. The one who controls perception controls behavior. And in relationships, that control often hides behind the mask of care. I just want what's best for you. I need you to be more sensitive. Why are you always so intense? These aren't just observations. They're recalibrations. Attempts to mold you into something safer, something smaller, something more convenient. But what if you refused to shrink? What if love wasn't worth having unless it came without a leash? Control doesn't always storm through the front door. It often slips in quietly, through guilt trips, veiled suggestions, and emotional withdrawal. And if a man isn't anchored deeply in who he is, he won't even realize he's being moved. That's the bitter truth Machiavelli would drive home. Men rarely lose power in one blow. They surrender it gradually, unknowingly, through 1,000 subtle compromises dressed up as love. It starts when he lets her opinion carry more weight than his instincts. When he begins shaping his speech, softening his edges, editing himself, not out of mutual respect, but to avoid conflict or gain validation. Over time, he becomes less of who he is and more of who she wants him to be. Not because she asked outright, but because he internalized the idea that peace and acceptance are earned through self-erasure. A strong man doesn't become weak because he shows love. He becomes weak when he forgets his backbone. When his emotional climate depends entirely on hers, when her approval becomes the oxygen to his identity. At that point, love is no longer connection, it's dependence. Machiavelli wasn't advocating cruelty, he was teaching realism. He believed a ruler, to survive, must be respected first and liked second. In relationships, the same logic applies. You don't lead through charm, you lead through grounded presence by being immovable in your values. If she senses she can mold you with tears, sex, silence, or disapproval, she will do it, often without even realizing. Not because she's evil, but because people instinctively test boundaries. Some women, knowingly or not, use affection as leverage. They sense when a man fears disconnection more than he values his integrity. And the moment that fear sets in, the dynamic shifts. She may still smile, still hold his hand, still say she loves him. But inside, something changes. Respect begins to dissolve. And once respect leaves the room, love becomes theater. The irony? The man believes he's keeping her by softening, but he's actually inviting her to look down on him. What made him attractive in the first place, his certainty, his purpose, his unshakable core, is now buried under layers of over-accommodation and second-guessing. And while he's busy managing emotions, she's quietly losing faith in the version of him that once stood tall without needing permission. Power, as Machiavelli saw it, isn't about aggression. It's about presence. And the man who refuses to fold under emotional manipulation, who honors his path over his impulses, disrupts the entire game. He can't be bent. He won't perform. He either inspires loyalty or invites departure. And both are acceptable. Because when you stop fearing loss, you start commanding respect. And for some men, that realization is the first step toward reclaiming everything they unknowingly gave away. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes wrapped in affection, disguised as support. A compliment here, a suggestion there. A small withdrawal of warmth when you push too far into your own power. Machiavelli would call this the soft architecture of influence. The subtle systems built to guide your behavior without triggering your resistance. It begins with compromise, the kind you barely notice. You adjust your tone so she doesn't misinterpret your intensity. You soften your opinions so she doesn't feel threatened. You stop talking about your ambitions because she reacts with disinterest or discomfort. Piece by piece, your edge is dulled, not by accident, but by design. This isn't love, it's containment. And the man who agrees to it believes he's maintaining peace. What he's really doing is trading his leadership for her comfort. Machiavelli warned rulers never to allow power to concentrate in the hands of those who did not earn it. The same holds in love. If your woman holds more emotional leverage than you, and she got it through manipulation instead of merit, she will not respect you. Only the version of you she controls. And here's the paradox. The more you give up to keep her happy, the more invisible you become. Not because she hates you, but because she no longer sees you as a force. She sees you as an echo. The echo of a man she once admired, now softened into submission. But the moment you reclaim your posture, the moment you stop seeking her validation and start enforcing your own standard, the mask comes off. Now she has to confront the reality she tried to suppress. You were never meant to be tamed. And if she can't control you, she may try to break you. That's not the end. That's the test. Machiavelli understood something most people miss. Love, when entangled with control, becomes a political game. And like any political game, it's governed by one rule: dominance. In this game, emotion is a tactic. Vulnerability becomes leverage. And the man who doesn't understand this gets played. So how does control start? It starts with your compliance, your willingness to negotiate with your values, your fear of losing her approval. It starts when you mistake keeping the peace for building connection, when you interpret silence as respect instead of manipulation. The truth is, the moment you begin molding yourself to avoid her disapproval, you've already surrendered. Not obviously, not with a big gesture, but quietly, one compromise at a time. You stop speaking up when something feels wrong. You apologize for your standards. You downplay your vision. And she notices, not consciously perhaps, but instinctively. She senses that you can be bent, that your spine is flexible when it should be firm. And from that moment forward, you're no longer her equal. You're her project. And projects don't get respected. They get managed. Machiavelli warned that rulers who wish to stay in power must neutralize threats early, often before they grow strong. In love, the same logic applies. A woman who fears being dominated will instinctively try to neutralize a man who shows potential for autonomy. Not out of malice, but out of strategy. She'll praise your humility when it keeps you soft. She'll criticize your intensity when it threatens her control. She'll reward behavior that serves her comfort and punish behavior that reclaims your sovereignty. And the tragedy? You'll think this is love. You'll think compromise is connection. But in reality, it's compliance disguised as harmony. And once you've tasted that dynamic, it takes real fire to escape it. There's a deeper reason why this kind of control works so well. Because it preys on a man's highest values, his desire to protect, to provide, to bring peace. These are noble instincts. But weaponized in the wrong hands, they become his chains. You're told being a good man means self-sacrifice. You're told strength is only acceptable when it's gentle. You're told to bend for love, to prove yourself by yielding, by listening more, asserting less. But here's the Machiavellian truth. When you place someone else's comfort above your principles, you don't become noble. You become replaceable. Because some women, those Machiavelli would call politically minded, don't want truth. They want influence. And the man who is always adjusting, always accommodating, is the easiest to shape. She doesn't need to shout. She doesn't need to threaten. She simply needs to withhold affection until you move the way she wants. It's silent training, Pavlovian conditioning. And the worst part? You call it maturity. You convince yourself you're growing, but you're not evolving. You're being sculpted. Machiavelli believed it's better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Not because fear is more noble, but because it's more reliable. Love, he warned, fades. Respect built on strength endures. So ask yourself, do you want to be loved for your obedience or respected for your essence? Because the second you give up that essence, the love that remains isn't for you. It's for the version of you she created. And that version, no matter how devoted, is never enough. Because control doesn't love, it consumes. Control rarely arrives with force. It arrives dressed as suggestion. A gentle nudge here, a raised eyebrow there. And over time, the man stops being led by his vision and starts living in reaction to her emotional cues. Machiavelli would call this a soft conquest. The kind that doesn't provoke resistance because it doesn't look like domination. But the outcome is the same. The ruler holds power, and the subject forgets he ever had any. A woman afraid of a strong man won't try to defeat him. She'll try to domesticate him. She'll use care as currency, praise as control, and disapproval as punishment. Not because she's cruel, but because she's afraid. Not of the man himself, but of what his independence reflects back at her. Here's the part most men miss. When a woman needs to control you, it's not always about you. It's often about her war with the masculine. Maybe it's her father. Maybe it's past betrayal. Maybe it's the deep belief that if she doesn't hold the reins, she'll be hurt again. But your job isn't to fix that for her. Your job is to remain unbroken, to hold the line, to lead, not react, to be the one thing she doesn't get to shape, a man with a spine. Because without that, you lose her respect, even if she stays. And once respect is gone, the love that remains is hollow, performative, conditional. A strong man doesn't seek to dominate, but he refuses to be ruled. He can be soft, but never submissive. He can listen, but never obey blindly. He doesn't chase validation through approval, he commands it through presence. Machiavelli believed that love without fear is unstable. But the fear he spoke of wasn't terror, it was reverence, a quiet respect for what cannot be manipulated. And when a woman feels that from you, the whole dynamic changes. You're no longer a project, you're a pillar. And pillars don't bend. Power doesn't need to roar, doesn't need to argue or explain, it simply is. And that's what unsettles those who crave control. A man who knows who he is becomes immune to manipulation. He no longer depends on emotional rewards or reacts to emotional punishments. He's unshakable. But how do you get there? How do you kill the version of yourself that was trained to submit for peace, to shrink for love? You reclaim your center. You start with silence. Not passive silence, but strategic silence. You stop explaining your standards. You stop oversharing your thoughts. You stop offering your vulnerability to someone who hasn't earned it. Every word you withhold is a reminder that your presence is not a guarantee. You reinforce your boundaries, not with anger, but with consistency. You say no without apology. You protect your time like it matters, because it does. You don't chase affection. You don't beg to be seen. Machiavelli would call this posture, how a ruler carries himself to maintain power. In relationships, posture is your emotional discipline. It's not about dominance over her. It's about dominance over yourself. The strong man doesn't retaliate when she pulls away. He observes. He doesn't argue when she tests him. He holds frame. He doesn't collapse when affection is withheld. He remains whole. And when she realizes she can't control him, two things can happen. She either rises to meet him or she leaves. And both are victories, because a man who chooses strength over submission never loses. He either deepens respect or he clears the space for something better. Control doesn't always look like force. It often looks like flattery, like softness, like subtle praise for becoming someone you never intended to be. That's how some women disarm strong men, not with confrontation, but with a slow erosion of his will. She tells you you're intense, so you tone it down. She says you're too focused, so you ease up. She jokes about your discipline, so you loosen your grip. And it feels innocent, harmless, even affectionate. But Machiavelli would tell you that any consistent attempt to reduce your edge isn't love. It's containment. Because once your ambition is dialed down, once your masculine force is smoothed out, once you become agreeable enough, you're no longer a threat. You're no longer sovereign. You're just useful. Useful for emotional security. Useful for predictable affection. Useful for making her feel strong in your absence of strength. But the great man, the man who follows his path with clarity, must learn to see these moments for what they are. Not love, but strategy. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must know how to not be good, not evil, but capable of rejecting moral appearances when they are used to control him. In the same way, a man must know how to disappoint expectations, to say no without guilt, to carry his truth even when it causes friction. Because the man who can be guilted out of his strength will be. The man who can be softened by emotional discomfort will be. And the man who fears being unloved for standing firm will trade his fire for affection, until neither remains. So when the world, or a partner, or even your own doubts ask you to shrink, ask yourself this: is this love speaking, or control wearing its most beautiful disguise? By now, you've seen the pattern. A man who yields his truth in exchange for affection eventually loses both. But here's the final twist, and maybe the cruelest one. When you become the version of yourself she can control, she no longer desires you. Not because you changed, but because you became predictable. Control kills polarity. It flattens tension. And what begins as an emotional entanglement quickly erodes into apathy. She no longer sees you as a challenge. She sees you as a reflection of her own dominance. And that doesn't breed passion. It breeds boredom. Machiavelli knew this. People don't value what they dominate. They fear it. They use it. But they don't admire it. And in the realm of love, admiration is the oxygen of connection. Without it, There's no fire, no spark, no drive to grow together, only a slow decay. So what happens next? She resents you for the very submission she engineered. She blames you for the weakness she once praised. She begins to pull away, not because you failed her, but because you succeeded in becoming exactly what she made you, manageable. And you? You wonder what happened. You think back to the moments where you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, the times you bent when you should have stood tall. And it hits you. Every small compromise led you here. Machiavelli didn't believe in regret. He believed in clarity. So let this be yours. If you have to lose yourself to be loved, it isn't love. It's strategy. And if you don't wake up to it, you'll spend your life playing a role in someone else's performance, while your own story goes unwritten. But that story can still be reclaimed. If you're willing to stop being agreeable, if you're ready to be respected instead of liked. Machiavelli never said love is worthless. He said love, like power, must be understood in its rawest form, unmasked, without the romance, without the illusion. Because once you see how power operates beneath even the most intimate relationships, you stop being a victim of it. You become sovereign. Some women will never love a man they can't control, not because they're evil, but because control makes them feel secure. Predictability makes them feel safe. A man who won't bend, who won't shrink, who won't compromise himself to keep the peace, he terrifies them, not because he's cruel, but because he cannot be contained. So they choose men they can mold. They praise sensitivity when it means passivity. They celebrate empathy when it means obedience. They say they want strength, but only the kind they can interrupt. But what happens when you refuse to fit that mold? You lose people. You get called difficult, arrogant, cold, misogynistic even. But that's the price of clarity, the cost of keeping your center. Because the moment you decide to stop performing, to stop bending, to stop begging for respect, you either attract someone who sees your strength for what it is, or you walk alone. And that's not a punishment. That's purification. Because if your greatness threatens her comfort, it was never love. It was leverage. And the sooner you see it, the sooner you stop negotiating with your own potential. Machiavelli didn't teach men to become tyrants. He taught them to stop being pawns. And sometimes, the first checkmate is simply refusing to be controlled. Walk forward unbent. Let the world adapt to you, or fall away trying.